Welcome to the Writer's Dream. The Writer's Dream is a forum where authors can talk about their books, how they write them, how they publish them, and how they market them. We have many, many talented authors here on Long Island. You can see them featured here on LTV. Please just look at the programming schedule. We also are broadcast from Cablevision all over Long Island and in Wappingers Falls. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on Facebook, The Writer's Dream. If you have any questions of our authors or of the show in general or want to be on the show, please contact me through the Writer's Dream Facebook page. Today, our guest is Kenneth Wishnia, and Kenneth Wishnia is an impressive author. He has won an award for The Fifth Servant, which we see up here, and The Fifth Servant has won an award from the Italian Jewish Literary Society. He has also written a series, which he will talk about, and this series, the first of which is 23 Shades of Black, which has a title that kind of evokes some other title, but I know this is a better book.
And mine came first, too, but thank you.
And this is also a series of books that was this particular one was an Edgar Allan Poe Award finalist, which is a very prestigious award. Kenneth also teaches at Suffolk Community College. He teaches literature and he teaches creative writing, and I'm very impressed, Ken. So tell us about your book. Tell us about how you got into writing and how it's related to your teaching. You could start with that.
First of all, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
How I got into writing is really from the very beginning. I mean, I was in second grade out in the Three Village School District, and the teacher gave us a homework assignment of, write a one-page story. And these are those pages where it's yellow pages with the blue lines, and the lines are this thick. But I came in with 15 pages of action-adventure nonsense. I mean, I've looked at it since, and, just completely illogical plot leaps. It's a 7-year-old boy's version of action-adventure, but, there it was right there. I was already thinking in these long forms. So, for some people, I know there are some writers who've said, well, I worked on Wall Street for 30 years and then quit and decided to write, and here came a novel. And I'm always amazed that, really, you sidetracked, a talent for art for that long.
I'm one of those people.
I felt it from the very beginning, is this need to entertain and tell stories. I have the day job too, and there's a difference. I can understand that. Most artists have a day job, but it very much comes into play in my teaching at Suffolk Community College. Most obviously in a crime literature course that I teach. So since I'm in that world, I bring authors to campus. We read their novel, the authors come to class, and for many of the students, it's a huge learning experience because we were just talking about this before. I actually have the experience pretty much every single semester of a student coming up to me saying, I never finished a book in my life, and I read this.
Yes.
Not necessarily mine, mind you. These are some of the other authors I bring in because they're popular novels, and they are page turners. But
they're popular for a reason, usually, right?
I'm sorry, what was it?
The novels are popular for a reason, because they're readable. Right.
I'm just saying for them, it's often their first experience actually enjoying something.
Absolutely.
They come in and tell me, it's like a movie in your head. I'm like, that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah. So, very much the two interact with each other. Did you want to know about the series?
So the first book that you wrote, tell me about that experience.
Well, the first one that got published, because I wrote a lot of garbage before I got good. But the first one is 23 Shades of Black, and this is the new edition out from PM Press. I actually wrote this using a typewriter in the mountains of Ecuador back in the 1980s. My wife is from Ecuador. We met in New York, but we moved down there, and that was really the genesis of this idea because I had planned on writing a crime novel for a long time, and I was sort of picturing, okay, a troubled cop, has trouble with, alcohol use and has to keep that in control. And that just sounded like, such a cliche. You've read 500 versions of that plot is out there. And as I say, getting married and moving to Ecuador, there was this obvious choice of, Ecuadorian American female, immigrant to the United States, that would be very different. And so, that's what I did.
What's your main character's name?
Yes, it's Filomena, a
Filomena,
Latina name.
like the movie.
That's out now, sure. Spelled with an F, though.
Okay.
But her last name is Buscarcella, so it's a complicated,
It's a
unpronounceable
great
name, which is just like mine, really. You'd be amazed how much trouble people have with Wishnia. That's because it should be Wishnia, which is, Polish and Russian. But anyway, the character is, an immigrant to the United States, and she has considerable challenges in this one. She's an NYPD cop. Her personal life and her professional life are on a collision course in this first one. The series continues, however, and this one just came out. The glass factory is set on Long Island, and I'm sure we could talk a bit about that because of that, but it's actually a revenge tale. It's not really a mystery, although there is mystery in it, but basically, early in the novel, she wakes up one morning and starts coughing up blood. And goes to a doctor who says, "Oh yeah, you have terminal cancer, a few months to live," as a result of the exposure to deadly chemicals at the end of the first novel. So she sets out to take revenge on the person that she believes has killed her, who is an industrial polluter on Long Island.
Oh, no.
Ladies and gentlemen. And I get a lot of material direct from the source. I have a friend who's a high-level investigator at the U.S. EPA, and there's a character based on her in the book. So, in fact, most of the science is based on real stuff here, folks. So, it is scary. You see the toxic symbol there on the cover. I've had people read it saying it sticks in your head afterwards, because even though I invent a lot, and of course I change names, most of the actual, scientific and environmental information is accurate. So. People have told me, they finish the book and then they go, suddenly they're thinking about the water in their glass.
I live near the old Republic plant, which is now a mall and an airport.
Sure.
And there used to be a catch basin on the west side of 110. Not there anymore, but it was the most amazing shade of emerald green. And one only had to wonder, what is that stuff in there? And I think now there's a diner built on the site. So, I mean, the regulations for cleaning up environmental wastes are very strict now, but I just remember that from back in the 50s, driving down 110 and seeing that emerald green water. It's the color of like the old antifreeze.
Oh, sure.
So.
And for those of us, I've been in Suffolk County. I mean, my parents moved here in the late 60s, so, we were the first county to actually outlaw, some of the ingredients in soaps. Was it?
Yeah, I remember that, the phosphates.
That sort of, and of course DDT was in the ground back then. So, and I guess, as my friend at the EPA, talks about one of the challenges of just getting something on the Superfund list and dealing with it is that for most of these, they no longer look like toxic waste sites. The stuff was dumped in the 50s.
They plant trees around it.
Yeah, the stuff was dumped in the 50s, and now it looks like a field. And so that's the challenge, the scary part. And also the effects. It's really hard. She actually landed basically the biggest cleanup project in New York State, the Hudson River cleanup.
Oh, yeah.
And aside from the fact that a certain large corporation who will remain nameless, was obstructing and doing all kinds of things and just throwing tons of lawyers at them all the time and saying, actually, PCBs are good for it. They practically said that.
You need a second head.
But one of the biggest challenges is if people are exposed to something like that, back in the 60s and 30 years later they get cancer, it's very hard.
Very hard,
to,
sure, of course. Absolutely.
Prove, a causality there. The company can say, oh, come on, he smoked cigarettes in the 70s, So
but,
that's
but
a
I
big
think
challenge.
it's becoming more difficult for them to prove that there is no connection because of all those studies that, have been done and are being done. And I'm all for this type of government regulation, if it's done correctly. If it's done.
That's a huge topic to get into.
So does she get her revenge?
Well, I wouldn't want
You
to
can't
give
tell
things
me,
away
right?
there, but it is a challenge. How do you generate suspense with a series when the audience knows? Well, your character obviously survives.
Yes,
and she's
because
given
there's
this
another book.
diagnosis. But I will say that when I wrote the first one, I did write it as just a novel. I did not think it was going to keep going, so I put her through the mail completely, and I thought I wrung her out completely, and that was it. But it kept going. She did continue, and so she's, the series is historical. It takes place in time. So she's, this takes place during the Reagan administration, this during the administration of George H.W. Bush. Somebody named Clinton, I think.
Clinton.
The name just vaguely familiar, is president there. There was a gap in the manuscript for several months in the fall of 2000 while I waited to find out who the hell was president so we could put his name in there. But it's finally in this edition. It did not make it into the first edition because we didn't know yet.
Yes, that's right. We did have to wait a while to find that out.
Sort of
But I want to go back to something you said, which I think is really important when you write a mystery, because I'm a mystery writer as well, is that if you have a character who goes from book to book, that character, besides the mystery, if you're just writing the mystery itself, the case study, it is a case study. But the character has to have problems. You have to give the character personal challenges because that's part of what draws people in.
Oh, sure. Well, so first of all, yes, her life does change. I mean, she's sort of a wild and crazy woman in her early 20s in this book. She's a single mom a few years older. In the next one, partially a result of her wildness and craziness in the first book. She's unemployed and desperate in this one with, a 4-year-old.
And lung cancer.
And yes, and then this big leap here where she finally gets her act together because her daughter is now 12 and she's thinking about college, even at the city universities. Still it's $30,000 for 4 years. So, so yes, time passes. But certainly, to go back to this one, and really in all of them, one of the things that you see is, of course, it's not just the puzzle mystery. Obviously, I have social issues,
Yes,
major
sure.
political themes that are going on in there, because for me, that was the attraction of the genre in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I think practically every crime writer starts, Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie, and we are, we all learn from them. But for me and a lot of the hard-boiled American writers, et cetera, and the noir writers, it's really Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler in the 20s and 30s who, show us the way for contemporary America. Conan Doyle, everybody loves, but it is the Gaslight era in Victorian London. That's what we read it for. We don't read Holmes for his,
Right, exactly.
We don't want to see him taking the subway in 1932,
Yeah, well, that's what's happening now.
That's a whole other thing, if we could get into that.
I read Arthur Conan Doyle because I'm interested in the science end of it, because I taught forensic science, and that actually, one of the times I taught the course, I started with Sherlock Holmes and A Study in Scarlet, which really talks about the first test for blood. To make sure
Which
that
they didn't
that
have at the
red
time.
stuff that's there is really blood. So,
Right,
and now of
Conan Doyle
course,
was ahead of science.
yeah. So that I find intriguing, but it is the fact that it's science in Victorian London.
I do a bit of that in this one, since we've got this huge poster here. I have to talk about it for a moment. The Fifth Servant is completely different. This is obviously a contemporary series.
Can I ask you one more question about this before we go on? My curiosity as an author myself. The first one won Edgar Allan Poe
Nominated for the
finalists.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay, so how did that affect your wanting to make it a series? How did the first book? You said you didn't write it with that in mind. How did you move into series?
Well, that just happened on its own. I already actually had the second and third novels written when this broke through. But, please, it made my career. For all you aspiring writers out there, I can tell you that I wrote the first draft, again, on a typewriter in the mountains of Ecuador, switching to handwriting with a pen when the power went out, which, back in the late 80s.
That's how I write. I write on these.
Back in the late 80s, happened with some frequency in the mountains of Ecuador. And, but then I managed to switch to a computer and get a steady source of power. But in any case, the character did continue to speak to me, and I found I could continue with it. So I actually had the 3 novels written, but it was rejected by agents and editors for 9 years. And this is me doing it right. I knew what I was supposed to do. Target your query, don't just blanket send out. And I never sent it out unless somebody said, "Sounds interesting, send it to me." So it was targeted, and it was still kept coming back. And all I can say is, again, to you aspiring writers out there, the rejection letters got better. I went from, you're wasting your time as a writer. I mean, I got that early in the 80s. Just like, quick,
Some
go do
of them
something
are so
else.
cruel.
You know, to this is original, well-written, and publishable, but we're not interested.
Yeah.
You know, so that's about as far as I got. And I actually gave up on, after 9 years, during which time I went to graduate school, got a doctorate, had 2 children, and wrote 2 more novels. So that took 9 years. I just gave up on the notion of commercial publication, actually self-published it. And it was nominated for the Edgar and the Anthony Award, which...
So that was self-published originally?
Yeah, the first edition. And this is back in 1997 when I really had to self-publish, not like today where, you know, you can just send an electronic file off and someone will, you know, do a POD for you. So I really had to create a company and an imprint and get barcodes from you know, that place. And I was lucky enough to get an advance review from Booklist, so I was able to put that, you know, on the cover. And so yes, I was immediately sort of snapped up by a commercial press with a 3-book deal, and you know, it went from there. But you know, for me, it was important that time passed and that she takes place in a historical reality. You know, she's pushing. You know, she's in her early 20s here. She's pushing 40 in this one with a 12-year-old, you know, daughter.
Yeah. But that makes it. I mean, most of the mysteries that I read are, you know, you're whetting my appetite, because most of the mysteries I read are that kind of thing where your character grows in time, and because you don't want your character. Even my teenage character is growing in time, so you know, she's getting more mature.
I think these days the audience expects it. It used to be, you know, again classics like Agatha Christie, who we all pay homage to. But you know, Hercule Poirot is a recently retired police detective. When we first meet him,
yes, for 40 years,
you know, in 1920, and really even 50 years, you know, and he's still that same person with no inner life, really.
Right,
And so yeah, people now expect, you know, the character to grow and change. One thing I will say is, there's always kind of, you know, major political and social issues. You know, yes, this one's environmental crime. You know, the one that's about to come out from PM Press, it's the poor treatment of immigrants in Queens, and there's a chapter on Long Island, and the lack of affordable housing, that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of humor in them.
humor helps.
You know, you know, just because I think a lot of...
But that's part of your personality, because you have this little wry, you know, very dry
genetic.
humor.
It's in the genes.
Right, and it I'm sure it seeps into your writing.
Oh, more than seeps, yeah, it's pretty much
So,
right out
The
there.
Fifth Servant.
The connection to this was just the historical forensics you were talking about, because, yeah, this one is completely different. It takes place in the late 16th century in Prague. It's a Jewish-themed historical, and the basic setup is, you know, it's 1592 in Prague. It's Holy Week. You know, it's Good Friday. It's also Passover, because they were at the same time in 1592. And, you know, the body of a Christian child is found in a Jewish shop, and the Jews are given 3 days to deliver the guilty party, or the whole ghetto is threatened with annihilation. It's hilarious comedy. Believe it or not, I do find lots of places for humor, because it is that, you know, Eastern European laughter through tears. You know, they're going to kill us anyway, so let's tell jokes kind of approach. Or maybe if we make them laugh, you know, they won't kill us today. You know, so it's that kind of thing. But one of the things I go for is, you know, there's the municipal guards, you know, the city guards are basically city cops. You know, that's how I think of them. I think of them as, okay, it's the 16th century and they all believe in witches and evil spirits, but they're basically cops, so that the sheriff essentially, you know, comes in, sees this dead body, is shocked, you know, actually says, I didn't believe the stories they told about Jews until I saw it with my own eyes, you know, and he's the one who actually gives them the 3-day ultimatum. But later in the book, you know, after working on him for a long time, they actually, they do find, you know, obviously, you know, this victim has had her throat slit so the blood could be pouring out, so that the Jews could be accused of, you know, the blood libel charge. But she also has a bullet hole. They found this, and of course these are these balls from, you know, the late 16th century. And they actually convince, you know, the sheriff to test a handgun, which in those days are, you know, this big, you know, actually on a pig's head, because I know from contemporary forensic science that they say, oh yeah, pig flesh is the closest to human flesh.
And they actually do use pig carcasses for forensics tests.
For testing, and you know, they actually do this, and it does help convince the sheriff. As I say, even though they're still very superstitious and prejudiced, he's still a cop at heart. So when he actually sees physical evidence in front of him, that, yeah, this wound is like that wound, which means how could anyone possibly have fired off this gun without a million people hearing it because the ghetto is so crowded? So, he is convinced by this, but I'm just saying, yes, I did 16th century forensics in the novel, so anyway.
Exciting, exciting. So, and this one was picked up by your publisher, so you're now all traditionally published.
Oh, well, I mean, the very first novel was picked up
Yeah.
and reprinted, so that was
And then
back in
these-
the 90s. Yes, so these are new editions now out, but oh yes, no, this was
Okay, so that's good.
one of the big six, HarperCollins.
If you were talking to a new writer, somebody who had what they thought was a good manuscript,